Our third presenter in this session is William Schultz. He's a graduate student in the Department of History at Princeton University. His dissertation, called Garden of the Gods, Militarization and Religion in Colorado Springs, 1941 to 1991, explores the interplay between evangelicalism and the military in post-World War II Colorado Springs. He received his BA in History and Political Science from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where his senior thesis, New Wine in Old Wineskins, Fulton Sheen, Rochester, and the Paradoxes of Vatican II, was awarded the Frank Ryan Prize for Best Honors Thesis in History. William.
All right, so I don't have a PowerPoint today, which in my case is mostly a good thing because I'm terrible with PowerPoint. But the one thing I regret is that you won't get a chance to see a picture of my protagonist, Robert LeFevre, in particular to note his almost uncanny resemblance to Glenn Beck. But I have been told that if you go right out the door, you can see a picture of Lefeve hanging on the wall, smiling with his trademark mixture of geniality with a slight bit of creepiness. So after we're all done here, go take a look. On April 6th, 1963, the Colorado Springs Free Press went to war. "We are not fighting this war with bullets, bayonets, or atomic warheads," they wrote. "We are not waging this war for personal gain. We are in it because we love our country, our state, our community. We challenge the residents of this community to join us in this attack on forces which would destroy our public schools, wipe out our tax-supported fire and police departments, place shackles upon our tax-supported city, county, state, and federal governments." Their target was the Freedom School. But what was the Freedom School? And why did the Free Press hate it so much? To answer the first question, the Freedom School was a Colorado Springs school that taught libertarianism. Answering the second question will require us to look at the history of the Freedom School. The story of the Freedom School begins with Robert LeFevre. In 1956, Lafave would found the Freedom School, but 20 years earlier, he was a DJ with dreams of becoming an actor. He wound up as something rather different, a mystic. In 1936, Lefeve joined the I Am movement, one of the many New Age religions that flourished in the 1930s. Now, Lefeve was an enthusiastic member of the I Am movement, and he reported a number of mystical experiences. In one of them, he drove for 60 miles per hour with his eyes closed, while his astral self left his body and traveled to California. Not too shabby. By the late 1930s, however, the I Am movement was gaining notoriety not only for its unusual religious practices, but for its ferocious attacks on Franklin Roosevelt. In 1940, the federal government struck back by indicting 24 leaders of the movement for mail fraud. Lefeve was one of them. But he escaped prosecution by turning state's witness. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Lefeve dabbled in right-wing politics. As president of the Congress of Freedom, he praised Joe McCarthy. With the Wage Earners Committee of the USA, he denounced unions as communists. With the United States Day Committee, he called on Congress to make October 23rd official United States Day. He even tackled one of the greatest threats to American security in this period, the Girl Scouts, who he denounced as communist sympathizers. It was through conservative politics that Lefeve became acquainted with the man who would bring him to Colorado Springs, R.C. Hoyles. Hoyles was born in Alliance, Ohio in 1878 and made a name for himself running a chain of Ohio newspapers. But he left the state in 1932 after someone tried to bomb his house, repeatedly. Ironically, this may have been the height of Hoyles' popularity. He moved to Santa Ana, California, and purchased the local Register, which he then parlayed into a national chain of newspapers. Most were based in small cities in the South and West, and all served as mouthpieces for Hoyles' libertarianism. Even among conservatives, Hoyles stood out for his opposition to any and all government. Roads, police, the military, they all ought to be privatized, he argued. As for public education, Hoyles was on the record comparing public school teachers to prostitutes. Unsurprisingly, Hoyles caused controversy wherever he went, and he certainly caused controversy in Colorado Springs. In 1946, he purchased the local Gazette-Telegraph. Now, at that time, the Gazette-Telegraph was a union paper organized by the International Typographical Union. Hoyles was determined to break the union, and in February 1947, he did. When Hoyles and the ITU couldn't agree on a contract, the union went on strike. The Gazette vanished from February 3rd to February 6th, and then on February 7th, reappeared, written and printed by strikebreakers. The union didn't go quietly, however. On February 3rd, another paper appeared in Colorado Springs, the Free Press. This one staffed by ITU employees. They defined themselves not as anti-Hoyles, but as pro-Colorado Springs. And their first editorial breathed the spirit of boosterism. We have but one interest, and that is the advancement of Colorado Springs in every way possible. We want to see our city continue to grow and to maintain its position as the most attractive city in the United States. Robert LeFevre stepped into this tense atmosphere in 1954 when Hoyles lured him to Colorado Springs to write editorials for the Gazette-Telegraph. But Hoyles Lefeve wanted to be more than a writer. He aspired to be a philosopher, America's first philosopher of freedom. Now, to be a philosopher, you need two things, an idea and a way to spread it. Lefeve had the first. He called his philosophy autarky. I might call it libertarian self-help. It was libertarian in its rejection of government. Lefeve wrote, "While all governments begin with the promise that they will protect the many peaceful from the few who are belligerent, it's in the nature of governments that the rules will be extended and expanded until the state itself becomes man's mortal foe." Lefeve believed that there was no political solution to this problem. No law could rein in the government because law itself was a creature of government, which is where the self-help element comes in. To destroy the state, Lefeve believed that people needed to achieve a revolution in consciousness. He spelled out the idea. The cause of individualism and human liberty is too important a cause to be entrusted to any organization. Only you can improve yourself to the point where you are competent and capable of defeating socialism within yourself. Socialism within yourself. Now Lefeve needed a platform for his ideas, and thus was born the Freedom School. In fall 1955, Lefeve purchased Glenrose Park, a 320-acre tract of land north of Palmer Lake. The next year, workers set about building a lecture hall and log cabins for students. Now, Lefeve didn't pay for this construction out of his own pocket. There were quite a few people around the nation who saw the value, intellectual and political, in a school that preached the evils of government. These were the people who funded the Freedom School. Most of them were conservative businessmen. People like Roger Milliken of South Carolina, chief executive of the Deering-Milliken conglomerate, or William Greed, a owner of a Milwaukee foundry and active member of the John Birch Society. Later, these funding fathers were joined by a young oil tycoon from Kansas named Charles Koch. With this financial support, the Freedom School was able to welcome its first students, 4 in total, in June 1957. They paid $150 for a 2-week comprehensive course in libertarianism, taught by Lafave and a handful of other libertarian pundits from groups like the Foundation for Economic Education and the Christian Freedom Foundation. A 1959 report by several Freedom School graduates revealed an institution that was not quite living up to Lefeve's dream. The Chamber of Commerce of Rockford, Illinois, had paid for some local teachers to attend the Freedom School. On their return, the teachers wrote a scathing report. They noted, of the 5 students enrolled in the mid-August section, 3 were people who had been enrolled in previous courses and were already disciples. The other 2 were revolted by the school philosophy and rejected it. The teachers seemed revolted as well, for they compared libertarianism to anarchy, called it unchristian, and speculated that the school was only a front for its local angel, R.C. Hoyles. Their conclusion? We believe the Freedom School is a very clever racket. Yet by the early 60s, Lefeve dreamed of turning the Freedom School into a college. To give this proposed Rampart College the proper academic luster, he set out to recruit an all-star faculty, and he succeeded. The associated faculty of Rampart College was a who's who of libertarian intellectuals. It included 2 future Nobel Prize winners, Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek, both economists at the University of Chicago. Now, granted, the connection of some of these men with Rampart College was limited. Hayek never taught a class there, but what mattered was not their presence, but their prestige. In addition to credibility, Rampart also needed money, and for that, Lefeve turned to the Colorado Springs business community. In February 1963, he gathered 80 local businessmen at the Antlers Hilton Hotel and asked them for $5 million to fund Rampart College. It was this fundraising appeal that led the Free Press to declare war on the Freedom School. The Free Press had long been frustrated by the fact that the Gazette-Telegraph reaped its profits from Colorado Springs while proposing policies that, in the eyes of the Free Press, were bad for the city. And now, again in the eyes of the Free Press, Another mouthpiece of R.C. Hoyle's was seeking money from Colorado Springs to fund another toxic venture. And so, the Free Press's editorial page became a drumroll of attacks on the Freedom School. Anti-Freedom School editorials appeared on February 21st, February 24th, February 25th, February 26th, February 28th, March 3rd, March 6th, and March 18th, and this is not even counting the letters to the editor. In April, the Free Press collected all of these anti-Freedom School editorials, letters, and cartoons into a single 14-page pamphlet for easy reading. Though the Free Press titled one of their editorials, "Must We Stand Alone?" In this case, they were not alone, but were joined in the attack by a group of other critics of Hoyle's and the Gazette-Telegraph. William Henderson, former mayor of Colorado Springs, declared, "I regret that Colorado Springs receives nationwide publicity of this type, advertising to the world that we are the home of crackpots." Maybe the harshest attack came from within the Chamber of Commerce. Now, when Rampart was announced, the Chamber of Commerce welcomed the school and bought an ad in the Gazette-Telegraph welcoming it. But a few days later, Tom McLaughlin, a member of the Chamber's executive committee, released a withering dissent. "I can think of many enterprises which would bring additional dollars to the community, yet which would be no more wanted by the chamber members than a skunk is welcomed at a family picnic." These attacks hammered the same theme. They accused the Freedom School of being un-American. Said one editorial, the Freedom School was spreading the poison of anti-public school, anti-police, anti-fire department, anti-taxation, anti-foreign aid, in short, anti-American way of life. They even reprinted an editorial from a local high school newspaper that accused the Freedom School of being un-American for opposing our American and democratic machine of education. Yet beneath this patriotic piety lurked a deeper fear, that the Freedom School was bad for business. William Henderson put it plainly, "I contend the organizers and proponents of Rampart College are a deterrent to our industrial program." The Free Press lamented, "Would we not prefer that this area be known as one of the most progressive in the nation, a place where industry is welcomed?" It is, then, best to look at the conflict over the Freedom School not only as a dispute over libertarianism, but as an episode in the long-running struggle to define and control the image of Colorado Springs. The city has always used its image as a selling point. It sought to bring in outside money by advertising itself as a beautiful, peaceful, business-friendly community. And so there have been many moments in times past when local elites have had to step in and curb ideas which seem to threaten this carefully cultivated reputation. In the 1940s, H. Chase Stone warned other natives of Colorado Springs not to criticize or take advantage of the soldiers at Camp Carson. In the 1990s, local corporations sponsored festivals of diversity to help the city buck its reputation as an evangelical Vatican. Seen in light of this history, the war on the Freedom School was simply part of this boosterish, business-minded tradition in Colorado Springs. Ultimately, though, it wasn't these attacks that did in the Freedom School. It was financial disaster. Lefeve's corporate patrons lost patience with his financial incompetence. And they were also leery about his background, especially the I Am movement. They wanted their movement to be respectable and respectable was not a word one associated with Robert LeFevre. They shifted their money elsewhere. Robert Lefeve, broke, was forced to sell the Rampart College campus. He moved to Santa Ana, California, where he continued the Freedom School as a correspondence course until his death in 1986. The history of the Freedom School makes an important point about bigwigs in the Pikes Peak region, namely that they have not always been welcome. Certainly, Lafave and Hoyles brought money to the community, but for many people, it was the wrong kind of money. They thought it carried an ideological taint. The Freedom School shows that growth is never just growth, and that money has consequences outside the balance sheet. It's a lesson that Colorado Springs and every community must be attentive to. Thank you.